This video is going to cover section 8.3, and what we're going to be doing here is we're going to look at the mechanisms by which we maintain homeostasis in the body. So what do we actually mean by that? Well, homeostasis is just simply the maintenance of a relatively constant internal environment by an organism or a single cell. So internal conditions in the body, they stay within a very narrow range. For example, body temperature, that has to remain very close to 37 degrees Celsius. So the internal state of the body is in a dynamic equilibrium, since the internal conditions, they're not absolutely constant. So illness can result then if the internal conditions change to any kind of a significant or great degree. So we have what's referred to as negative feedback mechanisms, and a negative feedback is the main homeostatic mechanism that keeps a variable close to a given set point. So it needs two components. First needs a sensor, something that's going to detect a change in internal conditions, and then there has to be some kind of a control center which directs a response that brings conditions back to normal or back to ideal conditions. And as an example of that, we refer to temperature, where, well, temperature is a very, very important one, in that most of the enzymes in the body, once again, they function optimally at within a very, very small temperature range. Same with the pH, as we've talked about before, where again, enzymes, they work optimally within a very small range of pH, and so those conditions, they need to be maintained as close to those ideal set points as possible. So this is the basic mechanism of a negative feedback loop, where you have the sensor and the control center of a feedback mechanism. They work together to keep a variable close to a particular value. So in this case, if you have too much of something that raises a stimulus with a change of internal conditions, which is then detected by a sensor, and then that data is sent to a control center, and which then creates a response to that particular stimulus, creating the effect of bringing conditions back to ideal or to normal. So example of a negative feedback loop is for example, regulation of room temperature in your home. So if we set our thermostats at 20 degrees Celsius, so that would be the set point in this example. That would be the set point, which is the temperature that you want to maintain close to within your home. So a temperature above that set point, the sensor, as in the thermometer in the thermostat, it detects the increase in temperature, and so then the control center, also in the thermostat in this case, it turns the furnace off, and then the room cools. Temperature below a set point, the sensor detects the decrease in temperature, and so the control center then turns the furnace on, and the room warms. And this is, largely how it occurs in many of the, feedback loops within the body as well, where we need to think of things more in terms of being on or off, rather than, a little bit on or, a little bit off, perhaps, where things, they just like the furnace in your home. Your furnace, it's either on or it's off. It's not a little bit on, or it's not a little bit off. It's either on or off. And so depending on the circumstances, that's what will happen. Either you need more heat in the room, so the furnace will go on, and if there's too much heat, then the furnace then will turn off. And so here as you can see, the both kind of feedback loops, where if you have let's say the top one would be an example of where there's too much heat, so that stimulus is detected by the sensor and then sends data to the thermostat, which directs the furnace to turn off, which then will allow the room to cool and the temperature in the room to get back to the set point. The bottom loop represents where there's too little heat in the room, so that stimulus then is detected by the sensor and then sends data to the thermostat, which will then direct the furnace to turn on, which increases the heat in the room and brings the temperature up to the set point. And so the graph that's there is actually quite accurate, because this is how the temperature in a room would be tracked, where if the temperature gets below a certain point, then the furnace will need to turn on, and then usually the furnace will stay on until the temperature is a certain degree above the set point before it turns back off again. So then you have this kind of sinusoidal curve, which kind of tracks around the set point, which is right in the middle there. So with regulation body temperature, the set point is 37 Celsius. So temperature above the set point, the sensor, which is the hypothalamus in the brain, detects the increase in temperature, and then the control center, also in the hypothalamus, it directs the blood vessels in the skin to dilate and activates the sweat glands. So thereby reducing the core body temperature. So temperature then below the set point, the sensor detects the decrease in temperature. The control center then directs the blood vessels in the skin to constrict and inactivate sweat glands, thereby retaining heat for the body core. And you can see this depicted in this diagram with the two loops here. So the upper loop then that would represent where temperatures are above the set point, and that then directs the response from the hypothalamus to dilate blood vessels and for the sweat glands to secrete, which then would reduce the temperature of the body core. Generally speaking, when we're referring to blood vessels here, we're usually talking about the blood vessels to the extremities. Okay, so in other words, the arms and legs. Then the lower loop that would depict a situation where temperature is below the set point, and so that again triggers the stimulus to the hypothalamus in the brain, which then directs the blood vessels to constrict and the sweat glands to become inactive, thereby retaining temperature in the body core. So that's a very basic explanation as to how body temperature then is maintained. A positive feedback now, on the other hand, is a mechanism that brings about an even greater change in the same direction. So, for example, with blood clotting, injured tissues, they release chemical factors that activate platelets, and the platelets, they initiate the clotting process and release factors that stimulate further clotting. So all body systems, they contribute toward maintaining homeostasis. And so we have the transport systems, So the circulatory system, it conducts blood to and away from capillaries where you have exchange of gases, nutrients, and wastes occur, and regulates tissue fluid composition. Also, the lymphatic system, as we mentioned earlier, it collects excess tissue fluid, which is returned then via the lymphatic vessels back into the circulatory system. And here is a diagrammatic representation of that. So cells are surrounded by tissue fluid, which is continually refreshed because oxygen and nutrient molecules constantly exit, and carbon dioxide and waste molecules continually enter the bloodstream. So this is not a bad diagrammatic representation of how that exchange takes place, and some of the structures and components which enable that to take place. So the maintenance systems then, the respiratory system, it adds oxygen and removes carbon dioxide from the blood, and also regulates blood pH. And then the digestive system, it ingests and digests food, providing nutrients to the blood to replace nutrients that are used in body cells. The liver regulates blood glucose and removes toxic chemicals. The urinary system, kidneys regulate blood volume, the salt balance, and pH. So the support systems then, that would include the integumentary system, so it protects the internal organs and produces vitamin D, and also the musculoskeletal system also provides support by protecting internal organs, stores minerals, and produces blood cells. Then the control systems, that would be the nervous system and endocrine system, and they work together to control other body systems to maintain homeostasis. So what is disease then? Well, we all have this kind of intuitive idea about what we mean by disease, but we can make a fairly precise definition where a disease is an abnormality in the body's normal processes that significantly impairs homeostasis. So you have systemic diseases. They affect the entire body or several organ systems. For example, lupus, also referred to as systemic lupus erythematosus. And then you have localized diseases, and they affect a specific part of the body. So, for example, dermatitis, which affects the skin, and arthritis, which affects bone. Then you have acute diseases, which occur suddenly and generally last a short time. So, for example, poison ivy dermatitis or influenza. Chronic diseases, they develop slowly, but they last a long time. So, for example, multiple sclerosis and most cancers would be considered the chronic disease type. Cancer is a group of disorders, actually, in which the controls of cell division fail. And we've talked about this a little bit before when we looked at chromosomes and DNA. It results then in the production of abnormal cells that destroy healthy tissues. And we have different types of cancer that we refer to, and they're generally the names are given to the type of tissue that where they arise from. So a carcinoma, this would be a cancer that arises from epithelial tissue. A sarcoma, this is a type of cancer that arises in muscle or connective tissue. A leukemia would be a cancer of the blood cells, and then a lymphoma is a cancer that originates in lymph nodes. So here are the key terms that we looked at here, as well as the key concepts, and we will continue our exploration of body systems in the next section.